their national interests and policies that they want to pursue jointly.
Social media will be used as a driving force going forward. It already has begun the movement for the right behaviors to change. And I'm hoping more and more that through various partnerships, whether it's through individuals or corporate companies or government or development agencies, we continue to work together to push this narrative in a positive way through social media.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker, the keynote speaker, Ms. Agnes Igoye, needs no introduction. She's a charismatic woman who wears many hats, but just to give you a brief background on her work. Ms. Agnes Igoye is the Deputy National Coordinator, Prevention of Trafficking in Persons at the Ministry of Internal Affairs. She's also a senior Aspen New Voices Fellow at the Aspen Institute. She contributes to teach a class on child protection at Harvard University, where she's an alumni. She also studied post-migration from the University of Oxford, and she's a mentor at the Clinton Global Initiative. She's also the founder of the Young Professional Mentorship Program, also known as YPMP, and a member of the Migration Experts Group at IGAD, which comprises 8 member states. Join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Ms. Agnes Igoye. We're so glad to have you to join us today for this discussion on digital threats.
Thank you very much for that really warm welcome. And, greetings to all our viewers, the audience. And today we are here to tackle emerging digital threats, which include terrorism, trafficking, and radicalization. I don't know how we are going to do that in an hour or so, because people have been doing it for a very long time, and they are such wide concepts. When I was asked to talk about this, I was just reflecting, on my own story, my own career, and my own education, and how I have interacted with these concepts. I think the journey for me started when I was 14, when the Lord's Resistance Army stormed my home. As young kids, you're just playing, and a cool Saturday morning playing, dodgeball. And then you just see a crowd of dust. And all of a sudden, you know that the Lord's Resistance Army has arrived. I remember my father having a discussion, because by the time we arrived home and everybody's running, my father is like, I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. And then from a distance, we see the rebels already dragging my cousin, sister. And then her brother coming forward and standing to the rebels and saying, leave my wife alone, because he had got it that the rebels were more interested in virgins. They wanted the young girls, the ones who are not married. I don't even know how my aunt very quickly had dressed up the daughter in her Gomez, and it was oversized. So there was an argument, as the rebels were dragging her, the brother was like, leave my wife alone. So when my father saw that, he said, no, that's when he got to know that his children now were being targeted. He had 6 very beautiful girls. And that's when he said that, we have to run. So running long distances through bushes, and finally being displaced at a Catholic mission somewhere in Balisa, and living through displacement. And for me, that was an awakening, call, because we are dealing with people. When we talk about violent extremists, those are the kind of people in our own story we can think of. Then it shaped my education. It shaped the work I did, because I ended up at immigration service. I remember, at the border, one of my first postings was at the Busia border. That's the time even before the peace talks, dealing with, movements. I remember one time I was working And when we caused the arrest of one of the LRA commanders, the next day the children were moving, and those were sex slaves, the people who had gone through the ranks of the LRA. So that shaped, all that. And through my life, I remember at certain points up to date now at the coordination office, running after human traffickers, then coordinating the national task force, amazing, ministries, departments, and agencies doing incredible work, on issues of trafficking. But today we are also dealing with the concepts, because it depends on whom you speak to, because sometimes one man's terrorist, another one's hero. And so it depends on whom you talk to. And it's also important, and I'm glad that today we have a really very competent panel, some experts in the area of terrorism, extremism, who are going to unpack some of these concepts. When I was doing my homework and looking at some of our policy documents, because I was like, okay, what do all these concepts mean? So with extremism, having the socio-economic, religious, political opinions, beliefs, perceptions, attitudes, and views contrary to those generally accepted by society. And then there are some people who go ahead, not just extremism, but violent. And those beliefs and actions of individuals or groups of individuals who support or use intolerant and destructive means to achieve socioeconomic, religious, political, those ideologies. Then we have the concept of radicalization, that process through socialization in which an individual becomes interested and involved in violent extreme groups, cause, and ideologies. And when you come to the prevention of trafficking in persons, because this is extremism, terrorism, and I think this morning you hear in our own country, when we crafted our law, the Prevention of Trafficking Persons Act of 2009, we borrowed the Palermo Protocol, the UN definition, where the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, and receipt of persons by means of threats, deception, use of force, abduction, taking advantage of people's vulnerabilities, and giving and receiving those payments to achieve the consent of the person, having control of people for purposes of exploitation. Now, in Uganda, we had to co-opt what does exploitation look like, for us in Uganda. So it's not just sexual exploitation, forced labor, but we have child marriage, we have harmful child labor, we have the use of children in armed conflict, we have use of people for illegal activities, debt bondage, issues to do with slavery, issues to do with the sale of organs, or use of organs for purposes of witchcraft, harmful rituals and practices, including female genital mutilation. And when I was looking at the issue of trafficking in persons, it's a global challenge. It's not just peculiar to Uganda, or it happens in every country. And when you look at the statistics, I remember the International Labour Organization and also IOM, at a given time in 2016, they were taking it approximately to 40.3 people in modern day slavery, 24.9 million forced labor, and 15.4 in forced marriages. So you can imagine what is happening around the world. And 1 in 4 is actually children. And so when we are looking at those concepts, we know that's not just Uganda, but they cut across. And if we come back, if I bring you back also to violent extremism and radicalization, we see that militaristic groups, even in our own country, issues of recruiting, propagating violence, falsifying, justifying real or perceived grievances against generally agreed principles. In our own country, we've had the attacks, for example, in Kampala taking place in 1998, the Kampala urban bombings, 1996 to 2001. Of course, we've had the LRA atrocities, whereby over 100 girls were abducted, the Aboke girls, the massacres where about 200 people, from the IDP camps and over 20 in Atiak or Mott, name it. And then we had the Kampala bombings. Those who were, in Kampala, you witnessed that, where, we had over 100 people, killed the Kampala twin bombings by Al-Shabaab. And we are continuously having also assassinations, by prominent individuals. Some people are acting as lone wolves. Some people have connections to extremism. So the drivers of violent extremism, radicalization, and terrorism, and human trafficking are diverse and very, very complex. And if we look at what is convening us today, the use of the internet and social media, it has had its role. And its use, we talked about its use yesterday, very great things, but even bad guys use the internet. And, the young people, especially accessing information, the use of social media, blogs, chat rooms, other popular communication tools, the use of videos and even CDs, and smartphone communication applications. Traffickers and violent extremists have taken advantage of anonymous spaces in this modern way of communication, spread violent extremist narratives, facilitate recruitment, training, planning, coordination, violent attacks, and also coordinating the activities in human trafficking. If I recall, when some of the stories along my life story, one time I was a student at the University of Minnesota, and my area of specialization as a Fulbright scholar, Hubert Humphrey, was human trafficking policy and prevention. I had the opportunity to come under the mentorship of Professor Harry Boyett and Dennis Donovan. So Professor Boyett worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a field secretary in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the Southern Civil Rights Movement. And so they taught me how to do community organizing. So during that time, then I came across social media pages connected with the Somali migrants who were at Minneapolis then. And then I was seeing a connection with the human trafficking ring where they were trafficking girls from Minneapolis as far as Tennessee. And so very excited, to employ my community organizing skills. I told my professor, I want to go to the communities and talk to these people. And then I recalled, if I went to Minnesota, I had watched Bihi. Bihi is an activist in Minnesota. His nephew was among the very, very first people who were radicalized and killed in Mogadishu, during that time. And so I looked for Bihi. So I went to Bihi, one of those, cold mornings, you're homesick, and it is all winter. And then I go and find Bihi. And then Bihi, we mobilized the community and we started speaking, to the people. And we saw that sometimes it is reintegration gone wrong. We realized that some of these children, they struggle because they had parents. When we talk to the mothers, they're like, no, my son and my daughter cannot speak to me in English. Has to speak to me in Somali. You can imagine your children are now growing in the USA, but you insist. Now these children are like, no, and traffickers and violent extremism, no, they know the vulnerabilities. You can imagine when you're a teenager, there's that age in our teenage years when you think your parents are no longer cool, that you know it all. There's that age, so traffickers know that. And then for the girls who are being trafficked, there's also initiation, they come posing as boyfriends, as somebody who will help you to run away from home. Before you know it, you're gone, you're away from home, you're hooked into drugs. Before you know it, you're into this ring, of exploitation. And so that was one of my also introductions to that. So we have to pay attention to our young people, who are struggling with very many things. In this very country, of ours, the struggles can lead to addiction. They can lead to alcoholism. And so this is not to look at these people and young people, as people who are problematic, but they need help and assistance. So because traffickers and violent extremists know how to tap into that, those are fertile grounds, for the exploitation. And then in my own work, I look at the current, human trafficking trends. If I narrow it down to the use of social media, this has increased, especially during the COVID-19. You can imagine we all went online. We are Zooming. But guess what? Even human traffickers changed their business models because they have to maintain. They have a business, to maintain. And so they went also online. And then we started seeing hikes of online exploitation, issues to do with pornography. Because now you can't move your victims, but you can condition them and stream live when they are there. And then we have our children in homes and online, and they have smartphones. Those have implications. And radicalization, for example, does not have an age limit. The younger you begin with young children, the better. I mean, the children copy and paste. That's why you find that children who have gone under sexual exploitation, even with, you saw in our very case in Uganda, including fathers defiling their girls, which is their secret. That is your secret between you and your daddy. When you're a kid, you think it is normal and you think you're special. It's later when you grow up and get exposed and know, then you actually get to know that you are being sexually exploited. So it is very important to know. And also to know it's not just the women and the girls, because I kept, when we are getting the statistics, I said, what happens to the boys? The boys are also sexually exploited. It's because our boys will not get pregnant, okay? Because when you see a girl getting pregnant, sometimes that's when you know the exploitation is there. But boys don't get pregnant. But boys, we know, get exploited, even sexually, at home. I don't know where you were, because I remember, if you remember the case of Berry, who was in Kalangala Island, he died before his cases were, when he was still in court, and he actually died, in prison. And I remember speaking to the prosecuting, people. I remember them telling me they brought children in a room just like we are here, because they wanted to find out with the children. These are young kids, 10, 12, 14. And as they were still there, the children started acting out what they were told to themselves and to each other. And they thought it was normal. And they were streaming that live from Kalangala. So you can imagine, these are kids, very innocent, and they think those things are normal, even among people. So really to pay attention, to that. And increasingly, we are also seeing the trends are online recruitment and all that from people we know. I've interacted with a victim, for example, her childhood friend and schoolmate started posting pictures on her social media page, and she would tag her. She would dress up like she's in an office behind the desk, everything acted out. And then because she knows this girl does not actually have a job, and then there she was in the Middle East, then she says, I can also connect you. Because she was 16, she even guided on her how to make her hair so that she looks like she's above 18. She sent her even to a witch doctor, so you can imagine. A witch doctor, they cut off hair from all the wrong places. So that was a luck, for her to travel, to the Middle East. And getting there, it is somebody else who welcomes her from the airport, taking her to the place. She gets to this place and she sees weird people doing weird things, only to realize the brothel. Then the friend was like, don't mind them. People here do things like that. After some time, the friend disappeared, never to see her again. Her first experience was actually 3 people high on drugs who raped her. And the catchword usually is that if you say, no, this is not what brought me here, they say, we paid for your air ticket, we paid for your accommodation, they remove your passport, and so you're stuck. And it becomes a challenge, in there. So some of those things are too good to be true. And you don't have to trust, people because they are your relatives, because they are your friends. Please verify, those experiences. And then we also have victims who fail to trace, people who recruit them because they'll say, oh, I met the person on Facebook or on WhatsApp, but now I can no longer, he's no longer there online. So the person is just to recruit, and send you wherever it is. Then there's the blackmail, the threats, taking pictures, of victims, for example, during sexual exploitation, and then posting them on social media. That's a control mechanism because you don't want people to see what is happening to you. So there's also the power of photography in recruitment, Ugandans, when we travel, we usually take very nice pictures. We want to show off, our Facebook pages. You've arrived in London, you go and take Big Ben and all these things. No one takes pictures of homeless people struggling. It doesn't mean that those people are not there. But the reverse, when other people come to our countries, they take pictures of our children who are struggling, maybe Kwashako, But for us, when we travel, all our pictures are always nice, very nice. And I don't know where you are, sometimes because you remember there's that season when the Basama come back. I hope they will not crucify me. But usually they can come like for 2 weeks. And when you're abroad and when there's winter, for example, winter has hit you really so hard that you become brown. But for us here, we see brown as that's great. When I post my pictures and somebody's brown, but you saw he left Uganda when he was very dark. So now all of a sudden the person is brown. You can even get these designer shoes at no cost. You go, somebody has thrown them at no cost. And remember, you come back, you're speaking very good English, even when you're communicating. So when you arrive in Kampala, you're only talking about nice things. You're not even telling people how you've struggled, that you sleep in a bus, which rotates the whole night, that you have nowhere to sleep. You want to, show off. And even your social media page or your WhatsApp page. So that's a recruitment tool for our young people. One of the survivors, they even sent her a picture of Rihanna's shoes, that when she gets to the Middle East, then she'll get that shoe. And then the excitement of the aeroplane, excitement. And, increasingly, even before lockdown, the means of travel and all that were becoming easier. And even the level at which communication was going was very, very, very fast. The use of fake accounts, false information, false identities. We find very old people, for example, posting profiles like they are children because they are just targeting children, to recruit. And haven't you ever seen, some people who say, I used to see this person on Facebook, but they look different in real life. People post things they want you to see, and they can target you, properly. Then there's this whole thing of online dating, people meeting on social media. We've had cases where, especially women, they show up at the airport, so much in love with somebody they've never met. You ask questions. They don't know who's picking them at the airport. They don't have money on them. They say, you take care of me. We've been dating for a couple of months and very excited. So even when you try to cancel and to say, go back and verify, they will not believe you because, a woman in love, my dear, to tell them that now stop because for her she's getting married. But we have to know that, much as people have met online and they've had great relationships and all that, but they do their due diligence. Please do that. How do I know this? That very particular lady whom I talked about, because she didn't have a contract or anything, so they said, no, you can't travel today. So she came back and went and used a land border that very day and traveled anyway. So the same officer, 1 year later, because, you put notes, as you clear people. 1 year later, she comes back on a wheelchair, sexual exploitation, damage. But, you can't say that, what I told you, So the so-called boyfriend was not the so-called boyfriend, she thought about. So let's really take care that as we meet online, as we date and do all those things, that we are careful when we do that. And then there's the whole aspect of money laundering, the movement of money, because it's also easy now, online. These days you can send transnational organized crimes. You find that you can get a lot of money out of trafficking, but you're fueling terrorist activities. You're using survivors or victims to carry drugs. So it's all mixed up, the movement of money. So there's that linkage in there. But I also want to point out the issue, because when the survivors are affected, it's also our responsibility. I talk a lot with people of the media, and always that when we are telling stories of survivors, or when we are sharing pictures, it's really wrong. For exploited children, you take pictures and share them. We've seen videos, some survivors who want to leave, to escape, they share videos, but also traffickers see these videos. Also the bad people see these videos. Sometimes they jeopardize investigations. And also, it also brings to mind on issues on the people who actually investigate these cases. Can you imagine the investigators, especially when it deals with sexual exploitation? I remember my first attempt. I was in San Francisco at the Not for Sale Academy. And so we had trainers, from San Jose Police, FBI, and different, trainers. And then we had to log on to see how many people are on pornographic sites. Just log on in the area to see. So the activity of what people were doing online. And then when it came to actually looking at the visuals, that's when I got defeated. I just couldn't understand. I just couldn't look at graphic pictures. 5-year-olds being sexually exploited, pornography and all that. That's when I raised my hand. And then I keep thinking, who takes care of those people? That's why it's really, really important, to take care of also our professionals, who do this kind of, who do the investigations and look, at these issues. And when we are looking at all these threats, and like I said, I'm excited about, the panel which is coming up. I think we really have to think awareness. We have to really know what is going on. That much as we're excited about social media, that we have to take charge of our own responsibility, to find out and look out for the vulnerable people, the children, and protect children, from predators. We really have to adopt that all society approach, that it takes not just one agency, not just one individual to solve this work. That's why the office I work for, we coordinate, 15 ministries, departments, and agencies who do this work, counter trafficking. You have to liaise with foreign affairs, representatives abroad for external trafficking, local government, ODPP, because you have to hold people accountable. You have to liaise with the NGOs. They support us a lot with the rehabilitation work. You have to employ your intelligence, because these are underground crimes. You have to employ intelligence, find out. You have to work with Interpol. You have to work with civil society. You have to work with parents. And the list goes on and goes on. And I really, because it is all our responsibility, I tell people, if you have a big mouth like I do, you talk about it. If you can sing, you sing about these things. If you get people who are affected, you write about it. So all of us have a role to play, this morning. So I'm excited about our panel discussion, and thank you very much, for listening. May the conversation begin. I thank you.
Thank you for that powerful discussion. Well, Agnes Igoye still remains a global crusader on anti-trafficking efforts. She represents Uganda on the global forefront on combating these existing threats that we're faced with today. I have an excellent panel of experts who've been tracking these efforts online and also supporting efforts to end this. I would like to invite them to join me up, and then we can start shortly. This session is being broadcasted on TV and online, and will be on for about 30 minutes on TV. So please don't lose hope. You can still follow the discussion on the social media live stream using the hashtag Uganda social media and Cast for Democracy. Thank you. So I'll be joining this panel as a moderator to carry the discussion forward and just to digest the insights from Agnes Igoye's keynote speech, but also to just share more perspectives from the panelists that have joined us today. I have one more panelist that's left, but I think she will join us midway. I will introduce the people who have joined me on the panel today briefly, so you can have a background on some of the work that they do. I will start with me. They say that the cook doesn't cheat himself. Yes. So once again, my name is Opolot Nicholas Lakwang. I'm a program officer at the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung, Uganda and South Sudan office. My background is I'm a trained lawyer, I'm a social entrepreneur, and a climate change activist with extensive experience working in the civic, tech, media, and knowledge sectors. I'm also a prolific writer. I've written on various range of issues such as climate change, the fourth industrial revolution, Africa's digital economy, the future of work, and the startups ecosystem. I'm also a member of the Internet Society Uganda chapter and a World Economic Forum Global Shepherd. So that's just me in a nutshell. Our first panelist or speaker here is Donald Sojok. Donald Sojok used to work with us at CAS Uganda, but I'll talk about him briefly. So Ojok is a social entrepreneur, community organizer, and development manager trained from Makerere and the London School of Economics. Earlier in his career, Ojok worked on many post-conflict reconstruction projects in northern Uganda. As I mentioned earlier, he worked at CAS Uganda before he founded Okere City, where he is now. So Okere City is an ambitious integrated rural development project on a journey to build a sustainable city in his remote and rural village in Otuke district, northern Uganda. Ojok is also an Ashoka Visionary Fellow, a PFAL Fellow, and is an alumnus of President Barack Obama's Young African Leaders Initiative, also known as YALI in East Africa. So a round of applause for Ojok Okello. And then next to him is Agnes Igoye, who I've introduced earlier on in my opening. I will move on to the next one, who is Mr. Besige Andrew, who is from the Ministry of ICT. So Besige Andrew works with the Digital Media Unit at the Ministry of ICT. This unit is responsible for championing government policy and also sharing the position on emerging local, regional, and international issues on behalf of the government of Uganda. So he's also been tracking digital threats online, and I felt useful to get his perspective from someone who is working to collaborate these efforts. Andrew has a keen interest in working with young people to also understand the world they live in. And this means the geopolitics in this context. And he plans on using his insights to continue inspiring learning among young people so they can gain a better understanding of our political sphere. And right here with us, we have Linda Abaho. We are glad to have you join us on this panel. You're welcome. So Linda Abaho is a Huduma Public Service Fellow. This project is jointly implemented by CAS Uganda and the Leo Africa Institute. Linda is also a labor support officer at the Ministry of Gender and works as, in her department, she handles day-to-day complaints and welfare issues affecting migrant workers in destination countries. So if you ask me, I think she's the right person to be asking these difficult questions on what we're doing about online or digital threats. Her current role has also allowed her to help hundreds of Ugandan migrant workers get justice and improve their work standards. So her love for social justice informs her pursuit of a world with equality and equity for every human being. So she has a shared belief and conviction in improving the welfare of people in society. So this is my panel, and I'm glad to join them to open this discussion. So today's topic is tackling emerging digital threats, extremism, trafficking, and radicalization. As Agnes Igoye mentioned earlier, these emerging digital threats are now taking a new form on social media. And so it's very important for us to create more awareness around these issues, but most importantly, to start having conversations around them. When you talk about digital threats, a lot of people, what comes to their mind is cybersecurity, data privacy, protection. But today, we will know that digital threats also include extremism, radicalization, and trafficking. So we need to take stock of the gains and efforts that can combat these emerging problems online. There are also concerns that social media giants or companies haven't done enough to tackle this problem. So we want to find out where the problem is coming from. Is it the government? Is it the public? Is it the companies? Who should we hold accountable? And if so, who sets the rules of engagement or the rules for the global framework to combat these online threats that we're faced with now? As Agnes Igoye mentioned earlier in her keynote, she noted that the internet offers terrorists and extremists the capability to communicate, collaborate, and convince. So today we'll also be examining how the internet influences this process, how a person comes to support terrorism, and the forms of extremism associated with terrorism. So the external speaker who will be sharing his insights and presentation with us today on extremism and propaganda is called Ayman Al-Tamimi, and he's joining us from the University of Oxford. He's a terrorism expert and will be sharing with us his unique insights on this. So I'll maybe request the technical team to broadcast his feed. Thank you. So we're now starting to see how the influence of terrorist groups like the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram cannot be washed away. These people have become very powerful, potent, and sophisticated. They now look like us. You cannot tell a terrorist on the street. They dress like you, and they live amongst us. So today, we will be looking at some of the ways we can identify and isolate these people and be able to enforce or report certain incidents or scenarios where they're supporting these vices. And another challenge that Agnes mentioned is that when enforcement is happening, we have the issue of unique jurisdictions. So she was sort of calling upon everyone involved in this fight to collaborate and fight transnational crime, organized networks of people that are leading to the rise of online trafficking, extremism, and radicalization. So just to give you a bit of context on what the social media companies have been trying to do, they have a global internet forum to counter terrorism, which is also known as the GIFCT, which is an industry-led initiative that has been launched by Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, and YouTube to curb the spread of terrorist content online. So the question I'll be asking my panelists today is, what direction do we need to take? Because we surely know now that this problem is so big and we cannot leave it to the social media companies alone. So we'll also be finding out the many ways we can contribute to this. So without taking much time, I will just dive right into it. So my first speaker here, Donas Ojok. Social media. What are the new threats? What has changed? What are the new actors online?
Thank you. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, perfect. Thank you very much, Nicholas. I would like to take this opportunity not to delve so much into questions of terrorism and radicalization and extremism, but rather implore us to think about other emerging digital threats that are perhaps not so much considered in discourses and conversations like this. And one for me is questions around digital exclusion and then hate speech. Digital exclusion, because this is an area where I am passionate about and that I am actively working in through my project that I founded called Okere City. So I noticed that when especially rural communities and other excluded minorities are not part of mainstream conversations, they will always continue to be marginalized. And when these marginalizations continue, then they become powerless and even economically disenfranchised. And if people continuously are in this cycle of economic disenfranchisement, they then become hotspots where radicalism can easily take place. So if you have a batch of young people who are not employed because they do not have the skills, they are not digitally savvy to utilize their talents in the digital space, they will be poor. And when they are poor, terror groups will find them as hotspots and then they will easily radicalize them. So for me, one of the challenges that I think we need to address, especially in Africa, is making sure that we include as much as possible many people, online and to be engaged in the digital universe. And perhaps maybe that is one of the ways we'll be able to address other digital threats such as radicalism,
Yeah.
extremism.
On the question of online inclusion, this brings to mind technology. So as we see it now, technology is a double-edged sword. The social media that we use it for many things. E-commerce, interacting, rolling out government services. But we're seeing that it's also causing these problems of digital threats. So how do you think we can use technology to sort of improve, fight the digital threats that we're faced with now?
Well, I think what technology offers is a knowledge platform, right? And so if we use digital platforms and other technological platforms as information tools to continue sensitizing people about what their goodness and badness are, that would just be one of the ways we could perhaps productively use these tools as an asset in the fight against extremism.
Thank you. I'll move on to Lina. Yes, Lina, on the issue of trafficking online, can you contextualize this in the context of Uganda? What are we dealing with? What are your experiences in combating this in your day-to-day work? Turn on your mic. Move further. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. On, I think, a weekly basis, we'll have someone walking into office and say, my daughter was taken to work in Dubai. And she went through a person who came to my home, said there's an opportunity, and if you pay me around 1 million, I will process everything. So the promise is that when this person gets a job, they're going to earn around 3 million per month. So the parent giving in 1 million is a very small loss considering what they're going to make from this person making salary. But why are they in office? They've lost touch with the person who offered this opportunity. So that's one instance of the people we deal with. But on social media, I think now traffickers are targeting the young generation because most have gone out of employment because of COVID-19. So we spend so much time on the internet. So there'll be all these opportunities and someone will go and they take them to Kenya. And they forget that at the ministry, there's a whole process to verify, fine, you've got employment, you're going to work in Canada, you're going to work in the US, come to the Ministry of Gender, bring all your documents, have your contracts, your visa, who is employing you, and we'll look at all of this and be able to tell you, okay, so now here you can go, because we'll be accountable for you, we'll be accountable for the Ugandan that's going to leave, and in case anything goes wrong, then you can come back to the ministry and say, I brought my documentation here. You said it was okay to go. So this is what I'm facing. How can you help? Then we implore the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the embassy. But I think that's something because what Dr. Okello was saying, sorry, is there's been a gap in information sharing. So there's us who are aware of all of these things, and the person that's being targeted, the person that's being trafficked is in the village. They don't know that all these processes are in place. So if they come with an offer that's really too good to pass on, they'll go. And then before you know it, the media is painting the government as a body that has failed to look after its people. Well, we are here, we can offer these services, they're available, but there's that gap, the information that's trickling down to the people that are being directly affected, and those of us who are in a position to help.
Thank you. That's a very relatable experience that a lot of people have to go through every day. We have relatives, we have people that are desperate to have these journeys to Europe. So this is something that's hard to us. It's something that we deal with every day. So in your work, what do you think needs to change differently? How do you think, what direction do you think we should be taking to improve the way we respond to assisting victims of trafficking online?
I believe we need to improve interagency and intergovernment collaborations because trafficking isn't only happening in Uganda and people aren't being taken from one village to another. No, they're crossing borders. Some of these are being taken to Kenya. So what do we have in place with the Kenyan government to say, okay, so this Ugandan is coming to your airport. Why? Why haven't they gone through the entire airport? So is there someone at the airport to verify the passport they're presenting, the visa they're presenting? Is there should be processes in place to say, okay, let me cross check with immigration in Uganda. Should we let this person go? Or this person is going and they don't know where they're going, they don't know who they're going to work for. There's a lot of missing information. We already do that at the entire airport, but interagency and intergovernment collaborations would go a long way because this is not a Ugandan problem, it's a problem of the world. So if we work together, and the internet has done that, made us a global village. But when it comes to problems, Uganda wants to handle it alone. It's now a Kenyan problem, or it's a problem of the Saudi government, but we are all affected at the end of the day.
Yes. And closely related to that is the question of youth and demography. The numbers, the growing population that we have that's causing the social pressures that we are faced with now, and that's leading to the digital threats that we now have. I'm going to ask BCJ, Andrew, to sort of give us his insight on how this is a ticking time bomb for Uganda, for Africa, and the world in general. What do you think about youth and demography and how this is causing these challenges that we now have? Because this is the root cause of what's causing this. Desperate people who are making desperate journeys.
Thank you, Nicholas. Everyone. Yes, the issue of youth. So much has been said about youth, young people, in the context of trafficking, radicalism, and extremism. It's important that we, number one, we understand the challenges that young people go through. These challenges are social, they're economic, they're also political. Young people generally do not feel that they are understood by the leadership. This is not only in Uganda, but across Africa. But they also, what has happened is that social media has created a bubble. Young people today desire the good things in life. They want the very best that life has to offer. Sometimes they want it so quick, but others feel like I've done enough, I've gone to school, I've studied, I'm doing all the things, I have a degree, I have a diploma, there are no employment opportunities, so I go online and then I'm seeing bad black posting these things, and I'm seeing this other person posting these things, so I want this life. So because they want this life, this good life, they become easy targets. And so it's easy to sell them a story. It's easy to paint a picture for them, a false picture for them. And so because it's easy to paint a false picture for them, bad people
bad groupings to take advantage of them. So like she was saying, someone will come to your home and knock and say, hey, your daughter has finished campus. Oh, she's a very beautiful girl. You know, there are no opportunities in Uganda. You know, me, I sent my niece. She's in Dubai. You see, even this new car I'm driving, she bought it. And so as a parent, you're like, okay, this is good. I can. And so you sell your small piece of land and you'll allow your daughter or your son to be trafficked to Dubai or to wherever. But the reality there is different because you've spent 5 million shillings to make sure that she goes there now. And this is where also us as parents and guardians, we have to be careful. So somebody comes and says, I'm taking your daughter to Dubai. Why are they going through Kenya? Why are they going through Entebbe? We need to ask some of these simple questions. But why aren't we asking these questions? I think it's because we don't know. We hear one side of the story, we don't hear the other side of the story. And this is where government has to come in. Government needs to always put this story out there. Please do not do this, do not do this, do not do this. Teach people to ask certain critical questions. Because if they do not ask these critical questions, this problem is not going away. It will get worse. Our median age in Uganda is now about 16 years. Education is so expensive. The government gives you primary education, gives you secondary education, but secondary education is not enough anymore. To become a driver in a government agency, you need to have O level. But I don't want my child to be a driver. I want my child to be like Nicholas, a police officer, you see? And so parents will become desperate, young people will become desperate. So I think until we begin to address that particular problem of the young people, until we begin to understand the challenges that they face. And some of these challenges are put on them by us, the parents. So, you'll excuse me, I'll go a bit native. Sometimes in the West, when you introduce yourself, hey, I'm basically Andrew, somebody else, Ojowo, no courage. That is pressure, you see. Who are you? Whose son are you? What do you do? So if I'm young, if I'm young and nobody knows my father's name, you've been seeing the cartoon on the clip on social media of Sekadugo Bosco. If somebody asks you some of these questions and you're quote unquote nobody's child, then you're very vulnerable. And I think it is important that number one, government addresses this challenge. How does it address this challenge? By constantly putting out this information. If you're going to go abroad to work, let's face it, people are going to continuously go abroad to work. If you're going to go abroad to work, make sure you follow these channels. These are licensed labor organizations. This is the criteria they must have. These are the documentations you must have. If you're going to make payments, this is the payment you're going to make. You make it in such and such an area. And please make sure that the following, that the contract you sign has the following. Maybe even government can put a legal clinic to help, you know. And then using social media. Those of us who use social media, I think it is also important that we become a bit responsible. Glorifying fakeness. I call it fakeness. Glorifying fakeness. Really, we need to put a cap to it. Yeah. And at this point, I think now it's incumbent on every user of social media to exercise this caution.
Yeah. So, given your background as a public policy and communications expert, I just want to interlink your discussion with access to information. This is part of your role at the Ministry of ICT. Do you think the problem is lack of information, lack of awareness? Because the everyday person is not interested in this subject. And that's why we have brought it to this conference, so we can provoke debate, discussion on this. How should we go about the issue of access to information?
Yes, there's something called the Access to Information Act. But the information is there. But the problem is how we present the information. It's boring. The way we present it is boring. It's a monologue. You just stand and quote an act, You don't explain what the app does, how it impacts on people. You just put it and throw it there. Even when you make an advert to run on radio and on TV, it's something very dull. I think we need to speak the language of the young people, to put this information out in a language that they understand. It could be through drama, it could be through dance. It has to be a language they understand. But at the same time, we also have to put it out in a language that speaks to their guardians and to their parents. Because in many cases, young people are not making decisions themselves. Sometimes these decisions are being made for them. And so it's important that when we're putting out this information, when we're speaking this information, because it's there, but we're not putting it out intelligently, we're not putting it out smartly, we're not putting it out in a language that they understand. We are putting it out in an elitist way, which I think is part of the problem.
Yeah, thank you. I'll move on to Agnes, and I'm going to ask you something that I've been meaning to ask for a very long time. A lot of times the efforts to combat trafficking online focus on government, institutions, enforcement agencies, and what. How do we place people in the center of this conversation? Like I asked him earlier, to make people interested, yeah? How do we make it their problem so they can?
A very good question, because like I said, trafficking is everybody's problem. Right now, I'm sure it has not affected you directly. You know somebody whom it's affected, whether in your own family or in your neighborhood. And I tell people that we come with various talents. You know, sometimes just tap into your talent on how to deal with it. And dealing with trafficking, like, you know, as Uganda, as even the world's really, if you've heard of the 4 Ps. First of all, prevention is very, very key. Export of labor, sometimes somebody was saying, well, it's just like Panama, that people are moving, because you have the right to move anyway, first of all. You have the right to go and work. Even with domestic work, you know, sometimes I wonder, because domestic work is work. It begins from what we think of domestic work. We minimize it. We don't pay them well. Look at when COVID-19 struck. The most important person in your home was your domestic worker. When you look at how you treat, even the naming, you call them house girl. You pay the shamba boy or more, who is trimming flowers, will even be the head of the domestic workers. And you minimize what they're doing at home. The reason they're even moving is because we don't pay them well here. And I have 30 survivors of human trafficking who are my advisors. So I interact with them all the time. One of the key things they say why they move, the majority actually, is to take care of their children. They say the men in their lives, the boyfriends, the husbands have abandoned the children. So they want to go and deal with them. So prevention is key. Unemployment, you know, like an orderly manner, is that they are moving because they don't want to go, but they just go. We find people going to do domestic work. To clean houses. So it is just Panadol. It's not like chloroquine. They want to stay at home, but to do what? And it comes with even skilling. The people who are moving, you know, the skilling. What do we do? How do we study? What are we trained to do after we finish school? What are the opportunities, you know, in our country? And then we deal with the protection, because if it has happened to you, you have to protect that person. There are some people who are re-trafficked. You know, they rescue you, come back home, but like you are at home, you say, then so what? You keep thinking that it could be better, that maybe it was bad luck that we are trafficked in the first place, that if you go somewhere else, you'll be okay. So like, how do we treat people who return? We have survivors of trafficking who return, and their relatives put them under pressure. What have you brought? Because you've been abroad. What have you brought? Our connotation on what it means to be successful. And when somebody comes with nothing, we start again blaming them and say, what haven't you brought back home? So it is critical. Then we have to prosecute. You have to hold people accountable. In Uganda, for example, we started the prosecutor-led investigations. It's now incredible how our police and prosecutors are working, hand in hand. We are this year from January to June, 170 cases. We're talking about over 300 traffickers convicted because the year has not yet ended. And when we see, because working collaboratively is important because we come with different skill sets, we are different ministries with different mandates. When we were crafting our own national action plan, which came into force in 2000, World Against Trafficking, every agency documented what they are supposed to do. But the challenge is it in our work plans? Is it funded? How much money are we putting into counter-trafficking work vis-a-vis what traffickers are getting out of trafficking? So if you're quoting figures about what people are remitting, that remittances are now beyond GDP, they are the most, what are you investing in people you are milking?
Could you give us a picture of the funding priorities on fighting trafficking online?
Yeah, we need, like I said, yes, like how much money are you putting? And even some on work plans, every ministry, we coordinate 15 ministries. What are you injecting into that work plan? Even whether it is awareness campaigns in issues of protection of survivors, in investigations, how are we supporting our investigative officers, who are out there in the field? How are you supporting the population? How much money are we injecting into that? That's why you find poverty alleviation programs are there, and they have their challenges there in they are talking yoga, all those things dealing with the unemployment. And also what does it mean to us to be successful in life? Like when you talk about the youth, what does it mean to be successful? Is it about the car? Is it, when we started working, you worked before you got that car, but now people want it. They want that Benz now, because if you're a lawyer, you have, they've told you you're a lawyer, you have this work, but you need that. People are even afraid to jump on a border or to walk barefoot. I mean, footing on the Kampala road, because what will my classmates see? What would they think? So what are our attitudes? That's how to change, the mindset. Because sometimes even what we think is out there is not exactly what is out there. People think out there, there are no poor people. Sometimes the success is actually in our country, because just you have to persist and work. People come to this country and make it. But, we go out there and we think that's how, much, even by the way, some people are also told that there are jobs in Uganda and they also traffic to Uganda. So it's a whole mix in there.
So our conversation basically seeks to reframe who a victim is, who a perpetrator is online, and while everyone always tends to think about the problem outwardly as a global problem, we need to recognize that this is also a domestic issue. You can be trafficked in Uganda, you can be in somebody's house and still be called a victim of trafficking. Yeah. So I just wanted to find out what are some of the signs of distress? How do you know that somebody is making an alarm, given your experience in combating trafficking?
Children have stopped playing. They no longer do the dodgeball. They no longer run with the tires. It's the video games. It is the smartphone. Some people, you are downstairs, even to communicate that food is ready. It's through text message or through WhatsApp. You're in the same house. You're a parent, but you're communicating to your children through WhatsApp. You have a WhatsApp group of a family, but you are all living in one home. So, and also listening, listening, to children, knowing who are their friends, I know of some people who have no clue. I mean, it is good to be a friend of your child on social media. Why are you not friends? Yeah? Why are you not friends? that your child has a Facebook page. I don't understand. But you're not friends on Facebook with your child. So who is feeding them with the information? And also, we have to take care of each other. And sometimes you'll know, why is that person not leaving the home? You know, domestic workers, they always leave accompanied. They don't allow them to get out of the house. They only go accompanied. So just to take note of things like that and knowing who are our children's friends.
Thank you, Agnes. So I'm going to move this discussion online, where we are joined by Ayman Al-Tamimi, who is a terrorism expert, who will also be sharing with us a presentation on the question of identity, propaganda, extremism online. So I'll just briefly introduce him to you people. Ayman is a graduate of Brasenose College, Oxford University. He has a degree in classics and Oriental studies. His work focuses on militant groups of all affiliations in Iraq and Syria, with particular interest in those of jihadist orientation. He has been cited in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Times London, the Washington Post, and other publications. We are glad to have you, Ayman, join us today for this discussion. I'll request the technician to broadcast him.
Yes.
Thank you. Over to you, Ayman.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be speaking at this conference. You can all hear me, right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, good. So yeah, my presentation was focusing on extremism and the case of the Islamic State in Africa. I think I sent my presentation. I hope it's actually being put up on display. I focus on the Islamic State in particular. I do, of course, Islamic State's not the only problematic extremist actor in Africa, but given my own knowledge and expertise on the group, I thought it worthwhile to focus on as a case study of extremism. In particular, because I think we have many problems of defining extremism, and it's often marred by relativism or not being precise, or you have this feeling of, well, you know something is extremism when you see it. But actually, I think the most useful way to think about extremism it's through theories of social identity and certainty about the world. This is developed by researchers and scholars such as J.M. Berger and Haroro Ingram. There are two sets of dichotomies you could, can we go to the next slide actually? Yes, so, this one, yes, this one. As I mentioned, problem of defining of extremism tends to be marred by relativism. The best way, actually, I say, to think about extremism is in terms of social identity and certainty about the world. I would say that extremism, it offers a clear sense of identity to those who subscribe to whatever extremist ideology happens to be, or worldview. And also gives a sense of certainty in thinking about how the world works, that it operates according to a set of principles and according to this worldview. And in contrast, say, with recognizing the complexities about how the world works. And there are two dichotomies to think about in terms of extremism. There's the in-group, so those who share your worldview, and the out-group, those who don't share your worldview, and also a dichotomy of a crisis as opposed to the solution. So, of course, in-groups and out-groups aren't only exclusive to extremist groups. We all in our daily lives, or in our own lives, we think of ourselves in terms of in-groups and out-groups. For example, I'm Iraqi by origin, and that could be seen as some kind of in-group, and then those who are not Iraqi, that's some other kind of out-group. And normally in groups and out groups, it can be, it doesn't have to be a hostility between an in-group and out group. It can be a perfectly healthy competition, say competing political parties or different religious groups that live in harmony with each other. But when, say, an in-group's success becomes inseparable from hostility and harm against an out-group, that's where you start to go towards extremism. And where you posit that the out-group by its nature constitutes a threat to the in-group. So it creates a crisis that requires some kind of solution. Next slide. Next slide, please. And the Islamic State is a key is a textbook case of this kind of extremist thinking. This is actually an article they put out recently in their newsletter called An-Naba, which actually talks about the Islamic State affiliated insurgencies in Central and Southern Africa, actually in particular in the Congo and in Mozambique. And of course, Congo is very relevant because and both these countries are relevant, in Uganda's neighborhood, so to speak. And there is also this question of intervention by other African countries in both Mozambique and in the Congo. And also, you could think about Somalia as well. But next slide, please. Next slide. So this editorial, it actually, you can analyze it through this framework of extremism that I mentioned. So for example, if you look at the in talking about in terms of in-group and out-group, the Islamic State or the Muslims or the Mujahideen, those who wage jihad and the truth, as opposed, say, to the disbelievers, the disbelieving alliance, the crusaders, apostates, hypocrites, and falsehood. And the crisis is supposed to be that the disbelievers are fighting the Muslims or the Islamic State. It all tends to be conflated together. And then the solution is to fight them, or to wage jihad or holy war, and then establish territorial control to implement the caliphate project. So looking at that op-ed, for example, it begins by saying God promises that, and this goes back to what I said about certainty about the world, God has promised the believers dominance and attainment in this world, and promises defeat and torment of hellfire to the disbelievers. And then it says that the African alliance against the Islamic State in Central Africa, it's only a new form of God bringing out the disbelievers in order to bring them onto the path of being defeated, both in this world and the hereafter. And it actually tries to say that the media, or the conventional media, distort the nature of the conflicts in Mozambique and Congo by portraying them as say wars for resources, or calling the Islamic State affiliate in Congo by the name of the group from which it originated. In reality, it says, no, the Islamic State is fighting today the disbelievers in Central Africa, waging jihad in the path of God and supporting Islam, and implementing the aim for which God Almighty created us. So you see, this is this dichotomy of the in-group and out-group, and also this very clear crisis and solution dichotomy. So it's a very simple and certain way of thinking about the world. And this is what I contend is really at the heart of extremism. You could really apply this not only to Islamic State, but other forms of extremism, whether in Africa or in other contexts. Go to the next slide, please. On the other hand, though, it is also when we talk about it is also important when we talk about extremism to think about the region-specific context in which it arises, and what is the value for an extremist group like the Islamic State to be operating or to be claiming operations in parts of Central Africa and to be communicating for its central Islamic State in Iraq and Syria to be communicating with affiliates in Congo and Mozambique. So the basic worldview is it's the same, that it promotes the Islamic State or tries to promote its messaging through its central media department, through its newsletter. But Africa, currently Central and Southern Africa in particular, have more specific values for the propaganda value for the Islamic State. In that it's seen as an expansion of the Islamic State, and a sign of it at a time when the group faced, even as the group lost territory in both Iraq and Syria. And this should actually be contrasted with, say, Western and Northern Africa, where you had Islamic State in West Africa develop out of Boko Haram, and you had Islamic State in Sinai and Libya for since 2014. The Central and Southern Africa, it's a more recent expansion of the Islamic State, but it has, in that regard, it has a lot of propaganda value for Islamic State Central. But also actually in West Africa, you're seeing signs of the Islamic State trying to recreate or to establish the same kind of governance project it tried to implement in both in Iraq and Syria at the height of its power. But not only that, you have the issue of, as I mentioned, one of the problems you can have in defining extremism is in terms of relativism. Well, the Islamic State itself does not see itself as extreme. It actually sees itself as being the authentic or middle path. And in West Africa, it's tried to show its own supposed righteousness and correct path in fighting those it did deem to be extremists. So that is the original group of Boko Haram of Abu Bakr Shekau, who was actually killed in May of May of this year. There was fighting between the Islamic State's official West Africa affiliate and his group, and the Islamic State ended up destroying it in the Sambisa forest. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the expansion messaging that I mentioned about the value of Central and Southern Africa to the Islamic State's propaganda. The editorial is titled "From Baghdad to Africa," and it talks about, it ties, in terms of propaganda, it ties bomb attacks that the Islamic State carries out in Baghdad with the operations that Islamic State affiliated fighters carry out in Mozambique and the Congo. And it tries to say, well, the Islamic State before was only fighting the Shia, which is part of the outgroup, only fighting them in Iraq. But now look how it expands and fights the disbelievers all over the world. Next slide, please. Whereas the Islamic State now not only strikes the Rafidites, but also strikes the disbelievers in general. And it's portrayed as a fulfillment of the vows of the deceased spokesman Abu Muhammad al-Adnani. Next slide, please. This is actually looking at the West Africa context. This is about the governance project and creating signs of governance and implementing the caliphate and establishing Islamic law, the propaganda value of that in West Africa. So this is a report that came out in its Islamic State's newsletter about the imposition of zakat, or it's an alms tax on populations under the group's control in West Africa. And it talks about monthly statistics of gathering, taking zakat taxation from the wealthy to give it to the poor, and mentions how many people received zakat benefits. And it says this is to be contrasted with the capitalist system of hoarding wealth in banks and so on. Next slide, please. And this is actually something that appeared more very recently. It's about supposedly implementing a judicial system and Islamic courts in parts of Nigeria that are under the control of this Islamic State's West Africa affiliate. So it says aspect of the work of the judiciary department and Islamic police in the Sharia or Islamic law court in Nigeria. Next slide, please. And this is what I mentioned, going back to the issue of relativism and the way the Islamic State, although it is an extremist group, it doesn't see itself that way. And actually, it placed great propaganda value on its own fighting of those it deemed to be extremists. So the original Boko Haram, which they ended up destroying. And here they celebrate how the return of thousands of people to the group of the Muslims. See, the Islamic State sees itself as representing the group of the Muslims in the world. And securing defection of Boko Haram fighters and killing the group's original leader, seen as upholding the authentic middle path the Islamic State supposedly represents. Next slide, please. Finally, I just want to talk about dissemination of extremist propaganda generally. In the early years before 2011, a lot of it was based on online forums that were password protected and you couldn't easily access. A shift to more open platforms came in 2011 onwards because of the rise of platforms like Twitter and Facebook, and also the way there's so much more information was being put out. And in particular, I think with the Syrian civil war, that really did change things. Things shifted around 2014 because open tech companies like Twitter realized how serious the problem was of Islamic State on its platforms. So you began to see more of a shift towards encrypted platforms like Telegram, where there's still plenty of activity going on there. And the company was initially reluctant to do anything about it, but it began to take steps in 2015. I would say Telegram and these encrypted platforms are still the platforms of choice, but there's still ample activity by Islamic State supporters on platforms like Facebook. And this actually goes back to what was mentioned in the introduction about the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. How effective really are various measures taken to try to crack down on this dissemination online? I would say it's very mixed results. Yes, there is effective algorithm detection to try to remove content as soon as it comes up. But there are many, many ways to bypass artificial intelligence on this and algorithm detection. And even in a way that the GIFCT acknowledges in a very recent report. So, for example, you could share Islamic State photos and videos, but you could try to remove the logo from them to avoid being detected by the algorithms. Similarly, if you're writing up things, you might use certain hashtags, but you might spell them differently or separate out the letters in a bid to avoid detection. And you might also create platforms that ostensibly look like objective news, but really it's meant to promote the content of the Islamic State under false cover of legitimate news and journalism. Next slide, please. So this is actually just, and what I'd emphasize here actually is even among I've actually been tracking Islamic State supporters on Facebook for some time. And even here you see that the Africa content, even though this is Arabic content, this is Arabic messaging here, they place the great propaganda value on what comes out of Africa. So this is an Islamic State supporter writing in Arabic, but he says, "New from our brothers in Africa," and this is actually about the Islamic court that's been set up in West Africa in Nigeria. And you see again many likes and comments from like-minded supporters. Next slide, please. And this one says, this is from some Islamic State supporter who purports to be in Syria. He's saying, "Oh God, just as you blessed our brothers in Mozambique with conquest, oh God, grant us soon conquest in Mecca and Baghdad, Damascus and Sana'a in Yemen." So again, the Mozambique, this is an example of the expansion propaganda value of Islamic State in Mozambique and in Central and Southern Africa. Next slide. This is an example of how you might supporters try to bypass algorithms and so on. They avoid mentioning Islamic State explicitly in their posts, and they put up the photos that the group puts out, but remove the logos from them. And here it just says, "War spoils of the sons of the beloved and in West Africa." So this is a photo report that was put out by Islamic State's West Africa about taking weapons from their enemies in I think it was in Nigerian security forces. Final one, next slide. The same account promoting what this judiciary and Islamic police supposedly in parts of Nigeria. There's actually plenty of other content. It's not just in Arabic, but also even in languages such as Swahili and Amharic. I wouldn't have time to cover it in this presentation. But I think that actually concludes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ayman. That was a very insightful presentation from you. A big round of applause for taking time to just share these unique perspectives on extremism, terrorism online, because a lot of people have lost their eyes on the ball on how big this problem is. So I really appreciate you for taking time to do this. So I'm just going to connect your conversation with some of the relatable scenarios that we have. Yeah.
Yes.
You talked about propaganda, identity. So I want us to just get into that. One of the things that the terrorists are doing online is spiritual mentoring. They look out for people who are vulnerable and they say, "You're part of us. You're Muslim, you're Christian." So we want to see how this issue of identity is influencing and fueling terrorist propaganda, because this is an important process in online radicalization. What do you have to say about this?
Yeah, exactly. I think that what extremists like, say, Islamic State offer, it's to offer a clear sense of the identity and also a clear sense about how the world works. There's actually an Arabic word, it's yaqeen, which means certainty, and it actually comes up a lot in the Islamic State's propaganda discourse about how they talk about the world. So certainty in the victory God grants to the Muslims over the disbelievers, certainty in realizing the caliphate project, certainty that the disbelievers will be defeated in this world and the hereafter. That's a very simple way of thinking about the world, and also offers certainty about it. In contrast, if you look around the world and you think of it in complex way, and when you think of the world in terms of all its complexities, then you realize there's a lot of uncertainty to it. But in contrast, you'd have the Islamic State offering a sense of certainty to those who might feel unsure about where their life is going, or don't have a clear sense of identity of who they really are. The Islamic State steps in, and or groups like, not only Islamic State, but all extremists can step in and say, no, this is who you are, and this is how the world works, and understand it in this way. And it can be seen like a simple solution to complex problems. I mean, essentially, this is the way Islamic State and this broader problem of jihadism has emerged in response to, I think, a broader identity crisis issue in the Muslim world about where does the Muslim world stand today? Why is the Muslim world in a lesser position than it was centuries ago? These kinds of questions, jihadism and Islamic State appear to offer a clear answer to it, which say, well, we deviated from our original identity and path. Let's go back to it.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to redirect the conversation back to my panel, but before we get back to them, you've been doing a lot of research at the University of Oxford. And I want you to just briefly share with us some of the ways we can counter these groups online. How do we prevent these groups from exploiting the internet? Because we're now seeing that extremist groups use conspiracy theories as a tool for recruitment, but also they use this to advance their radical agendas, exploiting uncertainty, fear, and mental health disorders among vulnerable people. We've seen what these people can do. And just to detach from the concept of just Islamist propaganda, we're starting to see that these movements are moving over to places like the US, the UK. They're starting to exploit the cracks that exist there. And we saw the people that stormed the Capitol Hill recently. This was related to Donald Trump. They did that. So the people who are exacerbating this online propaganda are not only Muslims, but the people like us. So how do we fight this kind of people online?
Yeah, I think one of the, one of the main tools really to counter all kinds of extremism and dissemination online is to rely more on human intelligence and investigation into this thing and human monitoring. Because like I say, for example, when I was looking at Facebook content, all of this was bypassing algorithms and I think tech companies sometimes they incline to this they think to be an easy solution of just relying on digital tools, but actually I think there's really a space for human investigation into this kind of content being disseminated online, and conducting, I think, doing intense research over periods of time would produce more insight into how the content disseminates and also how to counter it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your insightful contribution. Now I want to get back to my panel and see how we can wrap up this discussion. Back to you, Agnes. Changing global context. This problem is fluid, it's online, it's happening in ways that sometimes undetectable to enforcement agencies. How are we keeping up? You had also discussed some of the countermeasures, but how are we keeping up? How big is the challenge?
Thank you for that. That's why continuous training is important because trends keep changing. And I also want us to know that it's not just about fundamentalists who use religion. There are also lone wolves. There are people who have one issue, anti-abortion. They target you because you have a clinic that you're carrying out abortion. There are some people who want they are pure societies. They are anti-migration, okay? And so somebody can act as an individual and just, with the content they get online, and that, radicalization, they look for it. Sometimes not that the people who are recruiting, but there's also people who look for it. And to know that it starts early. In our very own country, remember, we've intercepted children who are taken to be indoctrinated from a very young age. So, so to just be aware that this thing is around us, that it doesn't have to take only the religious, component, but various aspects. And also, importantly, to take care, because they target mainly the young people. Sometimes when you're idle and you are unemployed and you actually have issues which have to be dealt with. So if the good people are not coming to these young people to support them, other people are going to take care and manipulate. And remember, a terrorist is not just that ugly looking person. They are very intelligent. They are, people who have studied, and they know what to do. They are really good people as they recruit. When I talked to B here, I remember in Minneapolis, his nephew, he will say, he had, this person he used to go to, he was a figure, like a parent. People loved him in community. You've heard whenever there's a bombing and all that, they say, oh my goodness, that was the most well-behaved person, in here. So for us to just dissect that terrorist, not that ugly looking, I don't know what, person, but they live among us. and training, of course, law enforcement. Law enforcement cannot do it alone. We rely so much on even intelligence from the people themselves. That's why community policing, all that, and also to take care of people who are constantly doing this work.
Thank you. Back to you, Bessie, because you're at the Ministry of ICT, and part of the efforts that the ministry does is collaborating with the social media companies on the aspect of digital diplomacy whenever such issues arise. Do you think deplatforming, removing the instigators from these platforms is enough? And should we just heap all the blame on the social media companies for the lack of oversight? What do you think?
I think it's not enough. Removing, because if you remove one radical person of Twitter, for example, these people have intelligent ways of coming back. They will use pseudo accounts. So you remove 1, 10 come up. So it's not enough. Blaming social media companies, the so-called tech giants, is also not enough. There's need for, number one, we must encourage intercultural dialogue, especially where young people are concerned. 2 weeks ago, a clip went viral where the deputy RCC of Nakawa was talking about how people are moving during our most recent lockdown. Gambano. It seems innocent, but one party will feel aggrieved. Why did you choose to specifically zero in on somebody who says Gambano? And this is how radicalization starts, because people will say, you see, everybody's against us. What Ayman was calling in-group view, you see? So that in-group view feels threatened by the out-group view. We have been a very turbulent political season recently. And if you remember, one of the candidates, every time he was arrested, he would want to shout out the name of the police officer arresting him, and he would make sure that this name comes from one part of the country. That is very dangerous. We need to call these out, because there's a way in which, for example, police will deploy its officers. If I am from Rukunjiri, they will not deploy me in Rukunjiri. They will deploy me in Masaka. If I'm from Masaka, they'll deploy me in Gulu. If I'm from Gulu, they'll deploy me in Karamoja. So there's a way in which they do it. So it is important that, number one, we do not in any way tolerate some of these mediocrities. And that calls for intercultural dialogue, education. Even when you get somebody and take him to prison, you need good prison programs that can help reform and show a worldview. Like Agnes said, you also need to train our personnel that are involved in some of these things, so that if one person reacts in a certain way, your training empowers you to not go his direction, but rather to correctively and suggestively bring him back, or to give your own view a higher platform.
Yeah.
So I think blaming the tech giants alone or removing these radical elements offline alone is not enough. It's a matrix of things that we have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In relation to that, the Ministry of ICT last year constituted a fake news desk, which collaborates with the Uganda Communications Commission.
Yes.
And from what I know, the fake news desk is purposely instituted to sort of flag content, yeah? Knowing what's real, what's fake. Do you mind sharing any progress on this?
There's been a little progress, not a whole lot of progress, unfortunately, but there's been some progress. What the fake news desk does is, every time fake news comes up, for example, on Saturday, someone had the audacity to tweet that the command of the land forces had been attacked on his way from Munyonyo and that his car had been sprayed with bullets. That was evidently fake news. So the fake news desk works with our media houses to always flag this fake news. So if this fake news comes out, you just get a graphic and put fake news and then spread it. So the progress is there. It's little, we could do more, and we do plan to do more. But again, we need support from all those, especially in the media space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Next to Ojok Okello, on the aspect of fake news, you've done some research on combating this. You have an interest in seeing that people have access to the right information and that their minds are being influenced in the right way. Could you just closely relate fake news and how influencing minds with the right information can go a long way towards combating?
I think one of the best, perhaps the best.
Can you move near to your mic?
One of the best ways.
You're still not very audible. Is it on?
Better?
Closer.
The best way for me to combat fake news is digital literacy. So most people share fake news content or even create it, mostly share it because they are not aware. Most people do it from a point of ignorance. And then, so if somebody just shares something that is fake because they don't know much about it, then perhaps the best way to engage this person is make sure that they are digitally literate. So basically, I think this is perhaps one of the most effective solutions.
Yes, Agnes, what's your take on this?
I think fake news is not just about people who are illiterate, because I can even be hired to deliberately share the fake news. So the ability to weed out that some people should actually be held accountable. There's a difference between that you're illiterate. You know, for example, I see so many, I'm sure many people are on WhatsApp groups. People just forward. Then they put forwarded as what? It is so, so dangerous. People have forwarded things, even with the vaccination alone. You know, you forward, and then you claim that, you know, you are forwarding it as you got it. So why forward when you don't? But also to make sure that cross-check, you know, there are just basic ways, even through Google. In fact, if they say so and so has died, you know, and prominent, you'll know that the news will be all over the place. Cross-check. So people don't do even the basic, you know, cross-checking. And there's all this urgency for people to break news. You want to be the first to deposit in your WhatsApp group so that they think you are most intelligent or you are the most, you get the news quickly. And yet it is, you know, not the right news. So the difference that, you know, there are people who need the education, but there are some people who deliberately do it because of different reasons. Either you are paid or you are disgruntled or something like that. So the ability to actually weed that out in the space.
Thank you. Just knowing what people perceive to be true and real, the traffickers, the exploiters, like you mentioned earlier in your keynote, they've become sophisticated. They're on TikTok, they're in Instagram, looking cool, and sometimes it's not very easy to tell what's real and what's fake. To you, Lina, what are some of the ways you think you can be able to look out and be able to tell that this information is not authentic?
Yeah, to many people who are targeted, you'll realize that they want you to be secretive about it. That is a red flag. When somebody tells you there's an opportunity, but you want to leave the country without saying bye. Your parents shouldn't know because you think it is your opportunity. And many times there are things which are too good to be true. Somebody comes to you that they are paying your ticket, they are giving you everything that then when you look around them, they are relatives and they're even poor. So you wonder, why are they not taking their child? Why are they not getting this opportunity? You know, they are in. Why is it secret? You know? And there are basics, find out, because the websites are also there, because the labor externalization, go to the, you know, website of labor externalization, you know, find out, you know, seeking information. There's one thing that, you know, people, because you also have to make a choice.
because many young people, you're on social media, but what are you consuming? Are you only consuming, the things that what, but when it comes to travel, you don't want to put in the homework or to find out why is it secret. That is really, really a red flag. That somebody is saying it's an opportunity. Why are they coaching you to lie about why you're traveling? Why are they coaching you? Why are you not the one going for the documentation? So some of these things, and to support each other, in that process. So it's very, very important that we seek knowledge, as well as even us on our side as government, to constantly give out this knowledge to the public.
Yes, back to you, Lina. I know our discussion is almost coming to an end. Yes, your take on this.
Agnes has basically said it all, but just to emphasize what she said, ask for all the information that you can get, because
To Ayman to just share a bit of his perspectives on moderation of content online, because we're starting to see that one of the reasons why we're able to see content that is extremist is because the algorithms that sort of churn out this content every day sometimes are not trained to detect that. And even when you're able to flag it out, when you forward some of these complaints to social media companies, they might say, on the basis of freedom of speech, I don't think we can remove this content. And that's why you're able to see that content in Arabic that he presented earlier. So I just want to get Ayman's take on moderation of content. What needs to happen?
Yeah, sorry, I actually, the stream was, the audio was cut out in some of the preceding sections, so I might have missed some of what was being said. But in terms of moderation, yeah, I think there just needs to be, I do think tech companies need to not rely solely on algorithm detection or artificial means of trying to remove offending content, but I actually think there needs to be more use of human specialists, those who know various extremist groups and could do in-depth research on their content and see some of the techniques they use, try to bypass the conventional artificial means of moderation or algorithms. That's really the only real solution I could see going forward for this, not just because otherwise, if you depend solely on content moderation by algorithms, artificial means, you're just going to have to be constantly trying to update it and incorporate new, say, offending phrases or ways of writing offending terms and so on. And then also then that might then lead to deletion of content or removal of accounts that are actually totally legitimate and not extremist. That's my view of this.
I see you have comments in your chat. Could you just respond to a question before you give us your parting shots in 1 minute?
No, someone was saying well, they didn't see the relevance in terms of the Uganda context. But I mean, my point was to try to say that the Islamic State could use as a case study of extremism, and you could really apply, let's say, these frameworks of in-group versus out-group and crisis solution, not only to jihadism, Islamic State, but other kinds of extremism as well. Whether it's Christian or along tribal lines and so on. And that I did actually see Uganda relevance in terms of the Islamic State's current insurgency in Eastern Congo, which ultimately started out as which actually did ultimately have a Ugandan origin by the Allied Democratic Forces. What unfortunately happened though is the communication between Islamic State Central and these local groups, it led to imparting and dissemination of the Islamic State Central's ideology to these groups, and they've adopted this ideology, unfortunately, and so it's given this very nasty jihadist and Islamic State aspect to what might have been insurgencies that started out from more local grievances out in
time. Your parting shot in 1 minute. What should we take away from the discussion?
Just that, unfortunately, Africa is seeing unfortunately, the rise of this Islamic State extremism in the recent years, and there needs to be more done to counter this growing threat. But also, unfortunately, the rise of Islamic State could be seen as part of a growing problem of a trend of extremism, not only in Africa, but around the world. So that's my parting message.
Thank you so much, Ayman, for being with us and sharing all these interesting ideas and giving us a new context, new perspective on this issue of digital threats. Back to my panel, everyone's going to have 1 minute, 2 minutes wrap up before we invite the next panel. Ojok.
Thank you. I think for me, my takeaway is that when it comes to online, we are all vulnerable, and we are all potential victims of all this plethora of digital threats. So how we waver, how we overcome these threats, basically will depend on how informed you are, how cautious you are, and why are you online? These are just fundamental questions that we need to ask ourselves. If you do this, then I guess you'll be able to overcome many of these digital threats.
Thank you. Agnes?
I think with me, seek information. Information is power. And to the adults in this room and out there, please, let's have an open door policy to our young people. They struggle with so much. Sometimes they just want us to listen. But many of us, to get to us, you have a secretary, you have to, I don't know what. We are too busy, even for our children. We've left our children, to grow up on social media. But let's be responsible. And all of us have the responsibility on if you have a smartphone on your phone, what kind of information are you seeking? Are you verifying? How are you supporting each other in the process?
Thank you. Andrew?
Thank you. Social media is beautiful. It's here to stay. It's going nowhere. But I caution, especially the young people, those who are in business, those who are in politics, those who are in slaying, whatever. I caution you, please be very, very careful with social media. There's a lot of evil on social media. It is important that we learn to distinguish what is true from what is not true. We learn to put things in context. That is only way we're going to beat radicalism, trafficking, and extremism. We need to be very, very careful in our use of social media.
Lina.
Mine would be to question everything you see on social media. Don't take anything on face value. So question everything, double check, read, research. Don't be quick to share something. Don't be quick to be taken up by something. Just ask. It takes 5 minutes, it takes 10 minutes, and it could save you a whole lot of trouble. So question everything that you receive, whether it's about health, whether it's about what's trending, question everything and double check the sources.
Thank you. For me, my key takeaway for this discussion is that we need to continue provoking debate on this issue. We need to continue championing. We need to continue supporting each other. We need to move beyond this panel and own this conversation. Because this problem affects our communities where we stay, we need to find a way to solve the root problem from where it starts before it gets out of hand. That's it for me. I'm going to request the panel for a group photo before we leave, and then I invite the next panel to discuss. Thank you, my excellent panel. That was a very, very exciting discussion that we've just had. Quite lengthy, but very productive. I would like to invite the next panel that will be moderated by Kwesi Tawaro to come onto the stage. Kwesi will introduce his panelists and they'll walk onto the stage. I'd like to hand over to him. Thank you.
All right. I think it's already afternoon. So good afternoon, everyone. Those of you attending virtually and the few of you who are in the audience today. My name is Kwesi Tawaro. I'm the Deputy Director at the Lea Africa Institute, and it's my profound honor to facilitate this last session of the social media conference in 2021. I don't know why ours was chosen to be the last panel, but I hope the reason is because it's the most interesting. So the panel that will start in a few will tackle the topic, the rise of global social movements and social media, a critical moment. Earlier, I was telling my panel that this is too complex a topic. I think it's meant for an academic conference. Our approach, though, will be slightly different. So I'd like to invite my panel to take their seats before I do the introduction. So if I could have Blanche, Pesh, Alex, and Judith. So over the next 1 hour, we shall be discussing something not very alien from what has been discussed over the last day and a half, which is the rise of global social movements. And this is really, let me remove my mask with your permission. This is really an important topic, especially coming after a difficult year that we had last year with the pandemic. I have prepared some remarks that are very brief, and I hope these will set the tone for my panelists. All right. Now, in a year that was marked by a pandemic, police brutality, violence against women, we saw the rise of a number of social movements that tapped into the power of social media and social media networks. And although social media networks like Twitter are not seen as a formal mechanism for holding public officials accountable, users have increasingly turned to them to call to attention abuses misdemeanors by public institutions and public officials. As many of you will recall, on May 25th, which incidentally happened to be Africa Day, in the United States, George Floyd, a then 46-year-old black man, was killed by police officers in Minneapolis, a city in the state of Minnesota. His death followed a white police officer, Derek Chauvin, holding a knee to George Floyd's neck for a grueling 8 minutes and 46 seconds. In those 8 minutes and 46 seconds, George Floyd could be heard saying that he couldn't breathe a couple of times. And until he lay motionless, the police officer's knee was still on his neck. We got to know this following a video that leaked online and was widely circulated. And with that was born what many have called the George Floyd moment, but it really reignited a movement that had started a couple of years earlier, which is the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, George Floyd's death sparked protests in over 30 major US cities and across the world, and gave traction to the Black Lives Matter movement that had been around from 2013. On 20th April this year, the former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty of murder and manslaughter in the George Floyd case. And I presume that was no minor victory for whoever was involved in the movement. Much closer to home, in Nigeria, protests over the notorious Special Anti-Robbery Squad, popularly known as SARS, following a video showing SARS officers dragging two men from a hotel and shooting one of them outside, went viral in early October last year. A few days later, protests erupted across major Nigerian cities, and very many young Nigerians using the hashtag #EndSARS brought the world's attention to what was happening. The protests drew in a number of international celebrities, including Nigerian musician Davido, American musician Beyonce, and Twitter founder Jack Dorsey, who in a message endorsed the movement and offered support. In Nigeria still, earlier in the year, we saw the We Are Tired campaign by young activists and women that made global headlines after two young women died as a result of gender-based violence in June 2020. The powerful campaign forced all of Nigeria's 36 state governors to declare a state of emergency over gender-based violence against women and children. Now, these, among other social media-driven campaigns over the past year, reignite an important question. Do these social movements represent a new dawn for social accountability? To discuss this and more, I'd like to introduce my panel, starting with, I think, the person closest to me. John Blanchet Msinguzi is a digital journalist with the Africa Report. Msinguzi holds a Master's of Science in Data Journalism and Communication, I believe, from Columbia University. He's a writer for the Africa Report and Uganda Radio Network, and his works have been published by the Pulitzer Center, rest of the world, and he has also contributed reporting in the New York Times. Blanchet? Round of applause for those of you.
Thank you.
Next to Blanchet is Pesh Ahumuza. She's a digital communications consultant and works with Takwimu Africa, a data visualization and engagement toolkit for civil society organizations and their development partners. She has experience in social media marketing and influencer marketing. She's a feminist and also started a body positivity campaign called Wear That Mini. Pesh? All right. Now, seated right next to Pesh is Alexander Hack. She's a political science student and an intern with Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. Alexandra is a political science student from Cologne, Germany, with a minor subject in public law from the University of Bonn. And she's done several internships, including in Eswatini, where she decided to study politics with the aim to work in development cooperation. Currently, she's an intern at CAS Uganda and is a firm believer that international mobility for students is becoming more and more important in shaping geopolitics. Alexander. All right. And last but not least is Judith Atim, who's a program officer at the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. She's also a communications specialist and has worked previously as a broadcast journalist. So without wasting much time, I'd like to ask John Blanchet to give us his initial go and pitch on the topic. Blanchet.
Thank you, Quiz. As he has introduced me, I'm an active journalist. So my introduction will be perhaps about the recent events. We are holding this conversation 2 days after the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, left office. He had no option to leave. He had no option but to leave because a report that had been commissioned by one of the people below him found him guilty somehow, if that's the right word, of sexual harassment. And it was a pull and push because the governor never wanted to leave. If I tell you what New York is, its GDP is roughly the same as the GDP of sub-Saharan Africa, 1.8 trillion US dollars. That's a very, very big economy. He runs a budget of more than 200 million US dollars per year. That's more
200 billion.
Yeah, 200 billion US dollars. That's more than double the budget of all the East African community countries. Aren't we currently 6 member states? Those are many. So he lives a very, very luxurious life. And he would not want to leave that office. But when the complaints started coming, he had no one to back him, including Joe Biden. Joe Biden said, man, you have to go. And in the end, he had to go. He left office on Tuesday. Back home, we have had this story of Mwesige Samantha, I hope you all know her, who was a senior attorney in the Solicitor General's office, and she has always raised a complaint of sexual harassment, pinning one of the seniors there, and that senior guy who is Christopher is it Gas?
Gashiravakin.
Yeah, I don't want to murder his name, so let me leave it there. So when you look at these two stories, I know that in the case of Mwesige, there was a committee which was put up, which looked into the issue and it dismissed the complaint. But given that these cases happen often and people rarely want to talk about them, Mwesige has been a unique case, and she usually tweets about it. And she has been tweeting about it in recent days after this gentleman was promoted to be a judge in the Court of Appeal. So I asked myself, what are the things that we may have got wrong? Did we get the right committee that looked into that issue? Who were the people on that committee? Are the people that believe that in this issue? Would we have got better people on that committee? Would we have got a better report? For me, I think those are the missing link. From New York to Kampala, there is a tweet and there is a reality of what is on the ground. So what's on the ground here is completely different from what's in New York.
All right. So if I got you right, you're saying in one part of the world, a tweet resulted in the resignation of the governor, and in another, an accusation by a public official over social media did not amount to much. And that explains the contrast.
No, it doesn't. And we shall delve much into what happens.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Blanche.
What's the difference between these two scenarios? Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Blanche. And after Blanche, I'll have Patience Ahumza. Patience, your initial pitch.
So I would like to speak on the Me Too movement, like Blanche has spoken about. The Me Too movement is basically a platform for women to share their stories and to talk about their experiences with sexual harassment, sexual violence, and all the forms of domestic abuse. While our counterparts in America are losing their jobs because of the things they've done to women and children and other men, in Uganda, when one Shina Ahumuza started a thread where women came out and started sharing their stories of who has sexually harassed them, we had media houses still hiring and still maintaining journalists who have sexually harassed people. And you have a tweet out there saying that this man has sexually harassed someone, but you're still hiring this person and you are still giving them a platform to share their views. Yeah. And what the police did was, instead of protecting Shina, who, when you come out and speak about sexual harassment, the first thing is, I'll give a personal example. When I shared my story, a friend, I would call an acquaintance, said, you shouldn't say something like that. You will not find a Mnyankole man to marry you. So you have such things whereby Shina was actually arrested by police for putting a tweet like that, for actually helping women and giving women a voice. I have been constantly called a slut, a whore, simply because I have the Wear That Mini hashtag. But Wear That Mini is empowering women, not just in body positivity, but we're actually doing crowdfunding for shelters of women who are victims of domestic violence. So these hashtags are actually doing some work online, but when we go to these institutions, they are not doing the work. How do you appoint someone to a top government position when you have a case of sexual harassment against them? That means you do not actually care about the women in your country. So while it is happening in New York and you have a governor stepping down, in Uganda, we have people being promoted. Yeah.
Thank you, Pesh. I think we'll hear from Alexander. Yeah, from your perspective as a student of politics. Is your mic on, Alex?
Sorry,
Okay.
better. Okay. Thank you very much, Chrissy. I'd like to talk about a more general topic. I want to use this opportunity to highlight the impact of globalization onto social movements. The example I picked to do so is the Friday for Futures movement. For those who haven't heard about it, let me give a short introduction. The movement started in 2018 in Sweden when Greta Thunberg, who's now the most famous activist of this movement, demonstrated, among others, in front of the Swedish parliament to point out the lack of action against climate change. Some people were posting about it and it went very fast, leading to the situation that students all over the world gathered together, organized themselves, and started to demonstrate every Friday, which is where the movement got its name from. I think this movement shows that the gap between actual politics and the demands of a specific group of people can be shown and expressed on social media and also lead to physical action. And in this progress, globalization plays a really important role, because to protect the environment is a shared value all over the world, and especially the younger generation is already well connected through social media. So for me, it seems only like a matter of time that they would spoke up together and speak out loud for their goal to protect the climate. But I also like to take a closer and maybe more critical look on this progress, because especially in the context of globalization, there are countless posts, videos, comments. So it's really easy to remain unheard in this digital space. So I think there are other factors needed to promote a movement to make it become so public. If we look at Fridays for Futures, they got a lot of media attention from their beginning, not just on social media, also from conventional media platforms. Maybe also their story is a really good story to tell, because you can't blame the younger generation for the climate change. and their demand to leave a world behind, which is also which can also be lived in from the children and themselves, makes it more likely to show solidarity from other groups. So they're the kind of the perfect demonstrators to present to the audience. Another interesting point regarding the media is that the movement is always referred to one of the most successful movements of the last years, but if we look at their actual claim, which is to keep the global temperature rise below 1.5 degree pre-industrial level, it is not achieved, and it will probably never be achieved. So why do we call it a success? Maybe this is also a question of definition. Another thing I want to point out is that it's not only the media is needed to make something work. So in this case, there were other really big players supporting the movement. To give an example, Greta Thunberg was invited to the UN Climate Conference in 2019. Or a lot of local politicians were inviting activists to have public discussions about their demands. And most surprisingly, even global companies were opening their doors to those activists, which seems a little paradox on the first side, because why should big global companies discuss with those students? Maybe it is also because there's been a little change of attitude within societies. People are becoming more sensitive about the environment and about protecting it. So the companies also feel this. And like I mentioned, this movement has a really good image and creates a lot of attention. So maybe it is also an easy and inexpensive way for them to profit from this attention by inviting those students and maybe also improve their own image. But I'm thinking I'm running out of time. So let me summarize. My point is that we should always take a closer look on the interests of the participating actors, and don't believe that something is becoming so popular and successful in a way just because of their great vision or idea. Of course, this doesn't mean that one shouldn't support social movements, especially climate change is a really important matter, and it is even more important to pay attention to it. I just think we should also reflect the intentions and the outcomes. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Alexandra. We'll hear from Judith Atim.
Thank you.
Make sure your mic is on.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much, Kwesi, and thank you to our audience that's joining us virtually and to everybody here in the room. I would present my pitch looking at what online activism is, and in particular hashtag activism, what it has morphed into as of 2020, its implications to policy, and maybe what the future holds for these kinds of activism. Online activism is quite new, but not that new. If we look at the advent of the internet, that's when we see online activism birthed. At that time, in the 90s, activism was mainly towards commercialization, companies selling their products online. And then years later, online activism gives birth to all these children, these different forms of activism. We have the feminist activism, that's where the Me Too movements and hashtags come into play. We have activism along racial lines. We have Black Lives Matter showing up there. We have the hashtag movements, of course, as splinters or children born from online activism, like I said. Everywhere and pushing for social justice, social equality for Black people. We saw in Nigeria The NSAS was basically about fighting the anti-robbery squad that was actually abusing people, taking their rights for granted, killing citizens over really very trivial issues. I would also think that it's important for us to question the success of these movements and activism last year. Have they been successful? I would say yes, they have, but also what makes 2020 special compared to movements that were done earlier, like the Occupy Tokyo protests years ago, and other movements that we've seen previously. I think 2020 was unique because we had a pandemic that literally shut down everything. So what does this do? We are all in our homes, watching TV, glued to our cell phones, following what's happening everywhere around the world. And we begin to sit back and pay more attention to what's actually happening beyond the pandemic. When George Floyd was being murdered and all that graphic image captured our screens, I think it gave the world an opportunity to sit back and reflect deeply about things that we take for granted. Because I think it struck a chord. This was not just about Black people, but anyone who felt marginalized, who felt like they were in a minority group. It was an important opportunity for people to actually sit and reflect. It was also, the conversations online brought all races together. We have white people, we have Latinos, we have everybody sitting and saying, look, this is actually wrong because this can happen to anyone. You know, you don't have to be Black for you to be a victim of an injustice. If at the end of the day, this is a human being just like everybody else, and so their rights have to be protected. When it comes to policies and the implication of these movements to policy changes, I think we also saw a huge policy shift elsewhere. In Nigeria, I think SARS was disbanded because of that movement, because of NSARS. In the US, I Can't Breathe, really we saw an expeditious trial of the police officer who actually stepped on George Floyd's neck. We also saw conversations of let's defund the police, put that money to critical areas like schools, education, social services. So I think going forward, the future for activism and hashtag activism in particular looks like really, really bright, but still there are lots of opportunities to learn and questions to ask along the way. How do you make a case that you can actually see changes? Like she was talking about the Me Too movement and its implications here in Uganda. Sorry, my time is up, just a minute.
Sure.
It's an opportunity for us to reflect and ask ourselves, do we sit back if we make certain pushes online and we don't see results on the ground? Or does that give us the zeal to continue pushing until we see policies formulated, we see reforms taken into consideration, reforms that actually work for everyday people?
Great. Thanks, my panel. I think I should set the ball rolling. And my first question, I think, can be picked on by any of you who thinks they're ready for it. And my pitch is that social movements actually predate social media. So social media did not produce Black Lives Matter or NSAS. NSAS, Black Lives Matter were produced by circumstances that were already prevailing. And if you look at social movements of global concern, 50 years ago, you had the civil rights movement in the US. You also had the feminist movement in the 70s, Black empowerment in the 70s as well. And in that time, we didn't have social media. But I think the questions that were asked for each of those movements as to whether they would be successful, to what extent they would result in meaningful change, are still as much relevant as it is today. So whether it's SARS, Black Lives Matter, Bring Back Our Girls, how can social media, how can social movements birthed in the age of social media sustain their momentum, number one, which was mainly driven online, and galvanize their gains, build allies? I see Pesh looking at me. You want to go at it? Okay, Blanche?
I should.
Yes.
I had an opportunity to be in the US when we had the case of George Floyd, and I was staying in a state called New Jersey. It's a state that neighbors New York. And what I learned from there is a tweet cannot bring any change. It can never. There are lots of things that happen behind the scene. That's what I may call the back end of these movements, which we don't know here, which we have not learned. Before we saw thousands and thousands of people go on streets in New York and in many other states across the US, there was a lot of mobilization behind scene. Text messages, emails, telephone calls. You would see these people with speakers moving around, inviting people, telling them, we are starting here, we are going here, we are ending here. So whenever we see a tweet come up, the other side of the Atlantic Ocean is that there is already many organized, let me call them community-based organizations that bring people to the streets to protest, that bring them with a common goal, a common target. And if it backfires, if something's changed, there is that back-end system that responds to any challenge that comes up. And for me, I think this is largely what we are missing here. Let it be politically, when we see these political hashtags trending, a political hashtag is trending, people join it. They are people who have never met, they don't know each other, they are brought together by a hashtag. So beyond this hashtag, how do you link the aspirations of these people to come up with a common goal? This is something that we miss, and this is something that we need to work on. And come Peshi's example that she gave, I think that scenario happened at the end of 2019. That was around December. That's when we had those tweets. So the question is, beyond these tweets, did we have the back end system that would bring all those people we are tweeting together to come up with a common aspiration to respond to the challenges that would arise and all other issues? So those are the things that we need to be looking at here, and that I think will bring success.
Blanche, I'll come to you, Alex. When you look at most of these social movements, whether it's Fees Must Fall or going back in history, the civil rights movement, like you rightly mentioned, the current movement to combat climate change, they are mainly driven by young people and mainly students at universities. So one can argue that students hold the key to the success and momentum of these movements. Do you agree?
I think we can combine this question with the one you asked earlier.
Yes, please.
Because I don't think that it's specifically the younger generation which is interested in changing or in pointing out social injustice, but a very important point is that the younger generation is already well connected on social media. So for them, it's easier to go along with our globalization. And also, I am not sure if it's really a momentum of social media. I would maybe call it a result of an ongoing process, because the digital tools have becoming more important in the recent years for everyone, not just for the younger generation. So we're handling nearly all parts of our life with our phone, if it's posting pictures, communicating. So why not political participation? And also an important fact of social media is what Judith mentioned, that if you have the feeling that something is not yet there and that you need to continue pushing, I think social media can be a really helpful tool there, because it's spreading the world faster and also more international. And sometimes it's not enough if something is being discussed within a country. So I think, in my opinion, social media can help to put more outside pressure and to create more attention on a specific topic.
Yes, I see Judith is aching to say something, but before you say something, I wanted to, tickle you a bit. You work for a political foundation, and when we talk about politics, at the center of politics is organizing. So yes, social movements create awareness about an issue, but when it comes to making the politics or policies, making the okay, yes, their organizing becomes important. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree with that, because there are so many specific and different interests of different groups of population. So it's always a matter of how organized you are, which resources do you have to really bring the topic up to the highest platform where it's actually discussed or where you can find a solution for it. And social media can help with that too, because it's an inexpensive tool which can be used by everyone. So you don't need a lot of resources. You just need a phone, which most of the people have. Of course, not all, and it's still something you need to have, but it's easier than other ways of participating in politics. So it can also be a chance to involve more people.
Interesting. Judith?
Yes, Kwesi, in response to your question about how to sustain the momentum of the social movements, I heard what Blanche was saying about the need to mobilize, and I think that's really, really important. But to me, more importantly, is the question of why do we have this campaign succeeding elsewhere and not succeeding in other parts, despite mobilizations? And I think at the heart of it all, there's the critical aspect of that consciousness that people have, the awareness that people have that this is a sensitive issue that needs their attention. This is a sensitive cause that they need to rally around and push for. So if you are in a space where people do not have that awareness, they are more passive citizens, then I don't see how successful such social movements will be. So if there's a group out there that's trying to mobilize, I think it's very important to take into account the awareness, the consciousness that people have, and the conscientiousness as well. There's being conscious and also having a conscience. Those are two things that have to move hand in hand for these things to be successful. And I think that is perhaps what misses elsewhere. We've seen NSAS was very successful in Nigeria. If you look at the map of Nigeria, every state is dotted, like all the campaign was national. When you come to Uganda, you would see, if we're talking about Free Bobby Wine, I think if we're to draw a map of where this hashtag is concentrated, we can actually tell. So if we do not have people rallying around all over the country, if they don't relate to a particular issue, then we are not going to see much gains being moved here. And the other thing is the sustainability. When we have hashtags trending, it gets to a point where people give up if they don't see action taken. But I think you need to keep pushing. Even when you knock and the door is not being opened, you don't give up. You just keep pushing. You have to sustain that conversation. Make the noise and make more noise until something is done.
Great, thank you. Pesh, I'll come to you. Like I earlier mentioned, if you look at social movements that predate social media, the civil rights movement gave us the Bill of Rights in the US. Black people were free to vote. On paper, came to an end. What would you consider the end goal for campaigns that have, lived online, like Me Too and the many other campaigns that you're passionate about? What would be the end goal? What would be your definition of success?
So I'm going to answer that with the question that Blanche asked about what was the backup plan for the Me Too Uganda movement that we had in 2020.
What was the backup plan?
So usually when people speak up, the public thinks that, oh, the women want justice, they want to go to court. But to be honest, when you go to the police and to court, there's a very high chance that the system is not going to work in your favor. We could give an example of Samantha. Yeah, she has been talking about this case. She has gone through all kinds of systems, but she keeps pushed back. So what we did is we have organizations like Frawen, which offer therapy. They help women to go for, if let's say a rape victim is pregnant, if a rape victim is sick, they find help for that person. So we have those organizations that have come up, especially in 2020, 2021, that are actually helping victims. I mean, it might be hard to go to police and actually get justice, but you need therapy at the end of the day. You might need rape kits, you might need medical assistance in any kind. So we have organizations that are doing that. But when those organizations are doing that work, they need funding. So that is when we have things like Where That Mini coming in to do crowdfunding for shelters of victims of domestic violence. And in that way, it's basically, you can't have the same solution for every victim of domestic violence. So we've tried to tailor different ways of, do you want to go to the police? Do you want to go to the hospital? Do you want therapy? So that has been our biggest backup plan. So I think for the Me Too movement to actually be successful, one, we need funding. There has to be funding that is specifically for one is you have companies that are doing CSR campaigns. So why don't you get that money and direct it to an organization like Frawen that is actually helping victims of domestic violence? You have shelters in Jinja and in Mukono that take in women who are victims of domestic violence. So use your CSR campaigns to actually fund these shelters. At the end of the day, that is one step of helping these victims. So there is funding, but also we need the government to step up. You cannot say that you are helping the Ugandan women and then you continue to hire or appoint people who have been alleged as sexual harassers and people who are abusing women. So we need the government to step up. We need institutions to step up. When someone speaks about their experience, don't just look at it as that person is looking for, what's the word? Usually they say that women are looking for attention, but who wants to be remembered as a girl who was raped? No one. No one wants to be remembered that way. I mean, yeah, I totally understand that some women and men have abused the Me Too movement, but what are the statistics of those people as compared to the people who've actually been abused and they're actually sharing their real experiences? So let's focus on the bigger problem of we have a lot of victims of sexual harassment, and let's step up with funding and be very intentional when we are hiring people. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Let's come to something that is really critical in the success and sometimes failure of these movements, which is identity politics. Do you think Black Lives Matter, that started, I think, in the year 2013, a major campaign during the pandemic last year in the United States, could have arisen in a different society, maybe Europe, or it needed to arise in the kind of society that had the kind of grievances that the United States had? Nicholas, someone keeps turning off my mic. I don't know why. Okay, and the victim who's a 46-year-old Black person and an aggressor who's a white man.
I really think that it was, if it were coming from a different society where we hadn't had so many cases, there's a high chance it would have been watered down as, quite often you hear things of, oh, it's just one case, it's not a big deal. But we've had so many instances of police brutality in the US and they've been brushed off. But here we have it on video and it is on social media. So I believe it was a very a very important moment. And I hate to say that way because someone actually lost their life, but it was also it was a turning point in the revolution, in the Black Lives Matter revolution. Yes.
Blanche, you agree?
Yes, please. I think, I don't think it would have succeeded in any other place apart from the US. We know that US has more than 200 years of racism, racial segregation, and it's something that still hurts people today in the US. US, we know it as one of the most developed countries in the world. If it's not, it's among the top. But Black people are very poor. Black people do not afford good education. Black people have not been fairly treated in the US judicial system for a very, very long time. We had all these cases for years of police brutality in the US, and we had never had a case that ended in the same way as the George Floyd case ended, someone being sentenced and being given a long sentence. So it was such an opportunity that was capitalized in the US. But also I need to highlight that Black Lives Matter had learned a lot since its foundation. By 2020, it's an umbrella organization. As of now, it's an umbrella organization of more than 150,000 organizations and most of them are based in the US, others are based in other countries. So when you have such a big social movement that is behind you, and you have a case which was like that of George Floyd, there is no way that it would have failed in the US, but I think it would have failed in Britain, it would have failed in any other European country.
I would argue that I could possibly still have failed in Africa because in the month of May, in which we saw the killing of George Floyd, the very first Kenyan and Ugandans to be killed during the lockdown, the first lockdown, were not killed by the virus, rather they were killed by police officers enforcing curfews. So in many of these African countries, citizens were being killed to prevent them from being killed by a virus. Why didn't this outrage us?
Because I think we need to look at how different we are. If people walk onto the street in the US, they are not treated as how they are treated here. When you walk around, before even you reach City Square, they'll have arrested you. You'll be at CPS instead of being at City Square. So that itself, this US is a society that respects that has some kind of respect for people's freedoms, which we still lack here in Africa. If people had that leeway of organizing, having huge protests, would be having impacts out of these social movements that we have, or out of the tweets that we put out every day.
Great. Alex, as a student of politics and an internationalist at that, what do you think is the role of identity politics in driving these movements?
It's a really interesting question and also difficult to answer. I think definitely politics plays a role in it, but it's hard to define which role exactly. Like it's already been mentioned earlier, that it needs a lot of different factors influencing a movement. And I think politics is one of them, but especially in this case, it wasn't the driving factor because it was a movement really coming out of the society regarding a structural, also political problem in the US. But it didn't just stay in the US, it spread all over the world. And politics were reacting to it, but also because politicians were under a lot of pressure. It's also this international pressure we talked about earlier. that you can't remain silent about a topic which is gaining so much attention. So the actual changes that needs to be done are happening in public policy, but politics was not, politicians were not the people starting the movement, but these are the ones who can react to it or who need to react to it.
Interesting. Atim, you want to say something?
Sure, Kwesi. In relation to the issue of identity politics, I think it is important and it does play a role, because when we see the social movements coming up, we see people banding, interest groups banding up, whether it's climate change interest groups, they have their own movement. You have identity groups formed along racial lines, along lines of gender, and all these constituencies definitely do play a role depending on how much push they give the powers that be to actually make changes. So if the issue is if the group that has come together is not strong enough in pushing for its needs and pushing for its demands and policy shifts and all that, then yes, we will see policymakers not taking so much action. But if these groups are relentless in pushing for what they want to change, I think identity politics becomes a very, very important aspect of pushing for social change.
Great. Thank you. I realize we have about 7 or 8 minutes to wrap up. I had promised our hosts would be out of here by 1 p.m. I'd like to throw a spanner in the works and ask my panel to help me. One, we've talked about all these very interesting global movements, whether it's Black Lives Matter, NSAS, and Nicholas, someone in your production house is really not interested in me leading this conversation because they keep turning off my mic. Please keep it on. I was saying that when you look, does it again? When you look at many of these social movements, their success, not to a large extent, but partly, the kinds of, okay, I think they need to get me a new mic.
And extra time.
Thank you for being so kind. Yes, I was saying that when you look at many of these social movements, especially the ones that have been really big in the last 3 years, they've partly been influenced by what you would consider liberals in the West, whether it's Hollywood or liberally minded activists in civil society, in media. And yet, here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and we're talking about important things like access to vaccination, where it's not just about that my rights have been infringed upon, but your very life depends on it. How come we've not seen a global movement as big as Black Lives Matter or Me Too in regards to vaccine equality? And yet this is a life and death matter. Any of you who's brave enough to answer? Yes, Atim?
I think this is very interesting. But when you look at the issues that marred the vaccine from the time it hit the market, a lot of fake news. Everyone suddenly became an expert on social media. Everyone was saying how bad these vaccines are. Not everyone, but a good number of people. There's a lot of misinformation that was peddled and moved back and forth. And to this moment, there are people you talk to who are just like us. I bet probably if you did a random questioning in this room, you'll have those kinds of views. It becomes very hard to push for something, in my opinion, when there are lots of skeptics still about that. And that's why earlier I was talking about the importance of having that awareness and consciousness. If you have that awareness that that vaccine equality is an important issue, that people really need these vaccines, and you'll push for it. But if even among the most vulnerable and the people who need this vaccine so much, you still have skeptics who are questioning how effective they are, who are questioning the motives behind vaccine and whether it's those of us who've received it are dying in 2 years or not, then it becomes also hard. And then secondly, this is a scientific issue where you feel, okay, let's get guidance maybe from the World Health Organization. Let's have these multilateral forces drive the agenda for equity and equitable distribution of vaccines. So I think the rest of the public become kind of passive and they're just waiting to receive.
Judith, I think you're skirting my question. I wanted to ask by show of hands, is there anyone of you on the panel who's a vaccine skeptic or who thinks vaccines are not important?
No.
So how come we haven't been all part of the global movement to advocate for vaccine equality? I think, Judith, your point there, I don't agree with you, but Blanche.
I think, please, we need to look at the reality. This, what would be a vaccine equality movement? What kind of support would it need? Where would it start from? Certainly, it wouldn't start from Europe because we know Europe or USA, because we know that's where most of these multinational companies are established. They are after money. They are not. They are after money, nothing else. Then you need a spark that can tell that no, you need a spark that can bring together millions of people or billions of people to say that, look, we need vaccines, the other part of the world. So if you don't have that, you have nothing. Can it start in the US? No. Can it start in Africa where we need vaccine most? Certainly, yes. Would it be influential? No, because those people who are manufacturing vaccines are after money, but we would try. I think I wish to be part of that vaccine equality movement. And for me to be part of it, I may not start it, but someone has to start it. That person has to be organized and they have all the necessities to sustain it so that I may join it after months, not in the first or second day. So we need someone start it, sustain it, as we get convinced to join it.
There was a campaign in Uganda a couple of years ago that had a famous tagline, "It begins with you." I'll have Pesh. Yes. Yes, regarding vaccine equality or inequality, whichever way you choose to look at it.
I think I agree with Blanche because the vaccines are being controlled by capitalist individuals, and we don't. That interest is lies more to the money than to our lives, to be honest. We do not have someone championing that in Africa. We have not had something to spark it off, like what you would think, what sparked off the Me Too movement. I mean, it was there, but there was a highlight. So we have not yet gotten that. And our leaders are also reluctant. So there's no way they're going to be pushing that. There's no way it's going to actually work like the Black Lives Matter movement or the Me Too movement because of the capitalist agencies behind it.
Alex, you have the unenviable task of convincing me because none of your fellow panelists has.
I think it's actually a good question to summarize our whole panel because it shows what does it need to start a movement or what is missing here. I think different things are missing here. On the one side, there's no united group of people who are claiming for the same thing because some people are already vaccinated, or like Jules mentions, other people are skeptical about it, or other people just don't care about it. Also, you don't have this personal effect, at least if you didn't have COVID already, but if you didn't and maybe you don't believe in it so strongly, you don't feel like you're missing on something right now. Also, what we talked about are the resources. You need the resources to start this movement, and they aren't here right now. Another thing is that it's kind of difficult on who to blame for that there's not enough vaccine, Is it their own government, or maybe the international companies producing the vaccines, or maybe other governments who are keeping their vaccines inside their own countries? So those factors leading to really unsecure situation, and you don't have any strict direction where you could push the movement into. I think that summarizes why there's no global movement about it.
Great. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Judith, Atim. Thank you, Pesha Humza. Thank you, John Blancham Singozi. And my parting shot is really 3 points that I think sum up our conversation today. One is, like I mentioned earlier, global social movements predate social media. So they were there before social media and will continue to exist even after social media. Number two, whoever frames the conversation on what is important or what is a social movement or not, I think still holds the key and the power to the success of the movements. And the third point, picking up from my last question to the panel, is I don't think you need the right moment, neither do you need the resources. I think you need a just cause. And I think vaccine equality is a just cause, whichever way you look at it, whether as a benefactor in the global West or as someone who has been on the short stick end of vaccine inequality in the global South. With that said, I'd like to thank you, our virtual audience, for being such wonderful listeners and viewers. We haven't had an opportunity to interact with you and hear your questions, but this being a social media conference, I'm sure the conversation will be archived for us online after this panel. Thank you very much. And ours being the last panel of the social media conference, I think, I hope we did our best to end on a high. So without wasting much time, I'd like to invite, we'll have a group photo and then I'll invite our amiable MC to take us through the next part of the program. So my panel, if you could join me for a photo moment.
Thank you, Kwesi, for your amazing moderation. I think we saved the best for the last. This was a very exciting panel. Now we know the extent and the context of global social movements. We're seeing that young people are collaborating, organizing themselves online, and propelling key issues so they can be able to get collective action to address them. So the Global Social Movements panel was a very relatable and personal panel to a lot of us that have been listening and watching online. So our next item on the agenda is the closing remarks, which will be made by the CAS program manager, Bernard Mukone. I would like to invite him on stage. You're welcome, Bernard.
I am assuming that the people here are not very hungry because I have quite a very long speech, so you will have to bear with me. Anyway, those are jokes. Thank you so much to our panel that just finished a few minutes ago. Thank you, Kwesi, for moderating the panel. I want to also take the opportunity to thank our panels that have been happening since yesterday. I think the conversations were really very amazing, and they did not just stop yesterday. and this being a social media conference, the beauty is that the conversations can continue even when Sheraton wants to kick us out. So we don't need a physical location to continue these conversations. This year's conference has been a social media conference, and it has happened online on social media. And the theme for the conference was digital democracy in a post-pandemic world. The conference has discussed quite a number of issues that have enlisted a lot of reactions online. I want to give a special thank you to the team that has put together the conference, led by our program officer, Nicholas. Nicholas, where are you? Nicholas Opolot, please come. So Nicholas has been with us for a few months. His energy amazes us, but when he jumped onto this conference, he took it on as though he has worked with the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung for several years. And Nicholas, I want to say thank you so much for putting together a very wonderful. Thank you so much. Nicholas worked with a team that I also want to say thank you to. The technical team that made sure that our online audience was not disrupted, was not bored, but was also not switched off. So thank you so much for making sure that the conference happens online without several hiccups. I want to thank all the cast staff who have supported the conference in your different roles. It was a great team working on the conference. I want to thank our partners, the Media Challenge Initiative, who have been very instrumental in taking very funny photos that I have actually not seen before. They made me stand on a 360-degree something, rotated around. Never seen it. Abbas, thank you so much with your team. We really value your contribution to the social media conferences that we always organize. I also want to thank in a very special way our audience that has been with us since yesterday, the physical and of course the online audience. We can't say thank you enough. Also to our speakers and moderators, thank you very, very, very much. Now, this conference shall not just stop here. We will make sure that the conversations are archived somewhere, as Kwesi said, but it also being online, the conversations must not stop. I mean, feel free to go into our socials and post your comment or any contribution that you have on any particular topic that has been discussed over the last 2 days. I can confirm to you that this conference will come back again next year, maybe in even a bigger and a better way. So thank you very, very much for attending this conference, and I look forward to the next bigger edition next year. Our audience, which is present here, please, you're welcome to dine with us, and the rest of the things will be online. Thank you so much.